Hi everyone, at the end of our last video we had just returned from our 3-week cruise to West Wales. When we came back we were dying to get back out there again. We didn't want that to be all of the sailing that we did, and so this time we decided to do a short little weekend trip across to the other side of the Bristol Channel, so to North Devon in England. We set out on a bank holiday weekend. That meant that obviously a lot of people were trying to take advantage of the day off, and so the locks were very busy and we ended up having to raft up. Luckily James and Chloe were going as well and we ended up rafted up against them, so that wasn't too bad. And once we got out there we had a little bit more wind than we had expected, and so we were able to get the sails out, which was really nice. While we were out there we decided to test out our radar. So the radar came with the boat and it is absolutely ancient, probably original to the boat, so it would be from the 80s. And when we first got the boat, the radar didn't really seem to be working properly. The range just seemed very poor. So rather than giving up on it, Nick decided to see if he could tune it. So he managed to find a manual, and after a bit of effort it seemed like we were getting a better reading, but it was hard to tell when we were in the marina because obviously we've got a lot of other boats and masts around and buildings around the marina, so it was difficult to know for sure. We decided to take this opportunity to get a better idea of how well it was working, and we were very pleasantly surprised. We found that it easily picked up the curve of the bay, and then when we got a bit further out and we spotted a ship in the distance, we turned on the radar again and it picked up the ship really nicely. So we're very pleased with that. Even though it's old, it does work, and so if we ever get caught in fog or anything, then that will provide some reassurance. It took us about 5 hours to get to Ilfracombe, which was about what we had expected. We got in and picked up a mooring in the outer harbour. Luckily this time we didn't have any flying boat hook incidents. Then we set out to explore Ilfracombe. So when you arrive you are supposed to notify the harbour master if you're going to be staying overnight. By the time we got in, the harbour master had actually already left for the day, but James and Chloe had got in before us and they had notified the harbour master that we would be coming. The harbour master was happy for us to pay in the morning and we got access to the facilities, which was really nice. They have toilets and showers there. a look around, we ended up deciding to move into the inner harbour just because we were worried that there might be a bit of a swell overnight and we might end up having a bit of an uncomfortable night. We were there on springs, and both the inner and outer harbour do dry out, but obviously the inner harbour loses the water more quickly, so you're dried out for longer. And we thought this would be a really good opportunity to test out our lifting keel. So we had kind of tested out the keel in Fishguard. We were sitting on the bottom at low tide, but there was still a little bit of water around the boat, so we didn't properly get to see the boat dried out all the way, whereas in Ilfracombe we knew that we would get to do that, which was quite exciting. By the time we actually dried out, it was about 10:30 at night, and so it was already dark, but we couldn't resist going outside to have a look at the boat dried out in the dark. Interestingly, we have our depth sounder set to read underneath the keel, but we have a lifting keel boat, so when the keel goes up inside the boat, the reading on the depth sounder is no longer accurate, and so our depth sounder ends up reading in the negatives, which is kind of funny. We had a very comfortable night's sleep, dried out on the sand. By mid-morning the next day we were dried out again, and this time we were able to get a look at the boat dried out in the daylight. We were really interested to see how our copper system on the bottom of the boat was working. So if you haven't seen our previous video, it is not copper coat, it's a sort of precursor to that, which is kind of built into the hull. We opted when we were in the yard to remove all the anti-foul from the hull and just see how it goes with the copper system, and we've been really pleased. One side of the boat had very little growth at all, the other side had a little bit of green slimy stuff, but it wasn't very much, and it cleaned off really easily. So Nick took the opportunity to give the hull a scrub and clean the propeller as well. James has a long keel, so he had dried out against the wall, and he also took the opportunity to do some maintenance on the bottom of his boat. I believe he replaced some anodes and patched up the anti-foul as well. Once we were done with cleaning the bottom, we went off to explore Ilfracombe some more. On our way we found a shop selling traditional Devon and Cornish pasties, which was amazing. They actually had 3 vegan options, and I had the vegan Cornish pasty, which was probably one of the best pasties I've ever tasted. The next morning we needed to head back. We weren't able to leave at high tide because despite it being a bank holiday, I unfortunately didn't have the day off, so I needed to do a bit of work before we could leave. I had done most of it in advance the day before, but there was still a bit more to do. So we ended up moving from the inner harbour back out to the outer harbour so that we could retain the water a bit longer and not get stuck while I finished my work. As an added complication, we knew that the outer locks in our home port were going to be closed at low tide, just because there wouldn't be enough water for boats to easily get in. However, we'd been told by another boat that had come in that the inner locks were going to be closed at high water because one of the lock gates had broken and there was such a big flow going through there that it wasn't actually safe. That made things a little bit complicated, and we knew we would have to time our arrival so that we got in sort of halfway between high and low tide. So by the time we left, our depth sounder was showing 0. Obviously it wasn't actually 0 because again we had the keel up, and so we did still have some depth left underneath the keel, so really we left at the last possible moment. And we were a little bit nervous about what kind of conditions we were going to find because there was some rough weather expected to come in. I believe it was because of a hurricane on the other side of the Atlantic, and the remnants of that were kind of coming across and potentially going to affect us. But when we got out there, it turned out the bad weather hadn't hit yet, and so it was actually extremely calm out there. So for most of the passage we were having a really relaxed time. We weren't really in a rush because we didn't want to get in too early. We spent some time just experimenting with different sail trim, trying to figure out what gets the most speed out of the boat. We had some music on, we were just chilling out, it was really nice. And then a very unexpected thing happened. Nick had gone down below, he was in the heads with the door shut, so I was on my own in the cockpit. And suddenly this huge swarm of flies descended from nowhere. I have no idea where they came from because at this point we were probably about halfway across, so we were over 10 miles from land. I have no idea how they arrived in the middle of the Bristol Channel, but there were loads of them. They all landed on the boat, they started landing all over me. It was really horrible, the feeling of having all these flies sort of crawling all over me, and I couldn't get rid of them. I was trying to shake them off, but that was making it really hard to steer, so I was struggling to keep in a straight course because all these flies just crawling all over me. They were landing on the steering wheel, they kept getting underneath my fingers and I kept accidentally squashing them, which was horrible. I had like all these bits of dead bug all over my fingers. It was really unpleasant and I didn't want to kill them if I could help it. Nick finally comes out and I'm just like, help, what do we do? So he gets a brush and starts trying to like brush them all off me. They weren't the kind of bugs that would bite you or anything, they were more like beetle type things, but not a very nice experience. They were landing all over the sails and the deck. They all started to just die on the deck, but eventually they did kind of disperse, not really sure where they went. That was a pretty surreal experience. The only other notable thing about that passage was that because we were going across the Bristol Channel rather than along it, the tide for the most part seemed to be hitting the side of the boat rather than being on our nose or behind us. That did make keeping a straight course quite challenging, and we found that we had to adjust our compass course to account for that, so that was quite a good experience to have. Other than that, we arrived back safely, all was well, we got in at just the right time to be able to go through both locks. I'm not sure what our next video is going to be, but I think we might do a boat tour. We did promise earlier in the year when we first booked the boat that we were going to do a tour and then we never got around to it, so maybe we'll do that. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.